Hello, welcome our audience to a very special interview with Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar, uh, who is also an eminent economist. And I enjoy reading his articles, mostly in Frontline and occasionally in Hindu, because he explains matters economics in such lucid manner so that a layman like me, can also understand it. And once after the budget, his article on Hindu, so it was so lucidly, he explained everything so lucidly, and then I thought that it will be better if I can have a conversation with him on his based on his article, and particularly various things he has actually analyzed there. So I welcome you to this second interview for Northeast Now. I'm really glad that you could agree for this conversation. Now,
Thank you for having me again.
yeah, and the today is a big day, of course, because these election results are coming in Delhi. But we are discussing the central government budget, recent budget. So, budget is something very important. It gives the direction, economic direction to the government plan, and also it affects the common man, though most of the time the common man actually is not aware of its implications. The first thing is that in the first part of your article, you have written that growth is decelerating because of the dampened consumption and slowing public capital expenditure. And private investment has not been making up for the slack. So, if you could elaborate on this particular point, please.
Yeah, so the fact that consumption demand has been slack is something which has also been sort of flagged by Indian business, which is finding that in areas which were supposed to be the more dynamic, particularly in areas like automobiles and you know passenger cars and two wheelers and so on. Not so much the high range cars, but in terms of the middle and lower range, and for the two wheelers in particular, that there's been an increase in inventories and therefore an indication that there has been a slackening of demand. And two factors seem to underlie this tendency. The first, of course, is that we know that people have been talking about ever since the sort of recovery from COVID began, that this is a K-shaped recovery, that there is an increase in incomes and earnings, let's say in the upper middle and upper income ranges, and not really in as far as much of the population is concerned. So mass consumption demand was anyway not growing. But to the extent that there was an increase in some sections which you could call, not in terms of it being really the middle of the income range, but because of it being what is considered to be a middle class in terms of spending behavior, that there was some increase in expenditure there. And that increase in expenditure also, it became clear when the RBI flagged the issue, was to a substantial extent financed by debt. That this kind of optimism about things improving post-COVID as the recovery was happening had also resulted in an increase in the contraction of a significant amount of personal household debt for housing, for purchases of automobiles, for purchases of consumer durables, for general consumption, discretionary spending, and so on. And the RBI had cautioned, saying that, listen, this is unsecured credit, and this is growing at too fast a rate because banks were moving away from financing infrastructure where they burnt their fingers because of losses which were incurred there and an increase in non-performing assets, that they were moving into the retail credit market. But that is largely unsecured credit, and that increased exposure at this pace can be dangerous. And obviously, it's something which soon sort of reflected itself in an increasing default rate in that segment. Normally, retail credit in the past was not a high default area, but defaults began, and banks were holding back. So credit growth was also slowing. So this combination of the fact that there was a very limited, area within which demand was growing post-COVID, and that even there it was in substantial measure financed by credit, a credit boom which couldn't be sustained, had resulted in a situation where the evidence was that in a number of areas demand was losing momentum, and therefore that, as I said, even business had flagged the fact that consumption demand wasn't increasing. The second, of course, is that with the government deciding to be sort of conservative with respect to relying on borrowing to finance its spending as part of its effort at fiscal consolidation or whatever you want it to be, that to the extent that expenditure increases were occurring, it was occurring because of very special sources of receipts which the government had. And these special sources of receipts were things like windfall gains because of the sale of spectrum, payments of which have been distributed over the years. Then, of course, special dividends from public cash-rich public sector enterprises like oil, ONGC, and so on. And then finally, this large transfers from the Reserve Bank of India into the government's budget. Now, obviously, I mean, the government has really, exploited those sources of income, besides, of course, depriving the states of a certain amount of their legitimate dues by relying on cesses and surcharges. That the net result is that you had saturated even that area. And therefore, if you wanted to be fiscally conservative and you didn't have access to these special areas, and you were not going to go in for taxation of that segment of the population whose income was rising as part of this K-shaped recovery, then obviously something had to give. And in the first instance, what was giving was capital expenditure. And therefore, capital expenditure of the government was slowing. And we know that in mixed economies like India is, that stimuli for private investment come from two sources. It comes from consumption demand and it comes from government expenditure. So both consumption demand is slowing and government expenditure cannot pick up because of the kind of financing structure which we see in the budget. The net result, of course, is that private investment also is slack. So that was what I was pointing to.
So that means there is actually it is structured in a way so that it is very difficult to see growth and expansion of the economy. So that is the internal things, and of course all these things will go in the later part of the question here. We have these questions in different mode, in different manner. So that was so far the internal, the domestic economic scenario is concerned. And immediately after that, you also said one thing: there is no scope for the expansion of economy through foreign trade in pre and post Trump time. So first, the first point was that domestic scenario. The second thing is that okay, maybe we can get some money, some funds through foreign trade. That is the next question. Now, why this pre and post Trump period time? Why we do not see even a very flourishing foreign trade?
I mean, that's a very large question. But what we know is the following: that the government, I mean, this government, both in its previous term as well as in the in the last two terms and now, that this government is basically try to focus on making India into a manufacturing hub. You're realizing that we've got the full benefits of being a services hub, and that continues, of course. We've got benefits of remittances from workers abroad, but basically we are in a situation in which if you want exports to grow, we need to actually boost our manufacturing exports. And the expectation was that because there was a change in the growth strategy, as well as a slowing down of growth, as well as some degree of conflict between China and the rest of the world, the dependence of China as being the main sort of source for global value chains is going to reduce over a period of time. And it was expected, or it was argued, that India is going to be a major beneficiary of this. And to sort of exploit that, the government was even willing to give huge subsidies. So, the production linked incentive scheme and so on, which was basically giving cash subsidies to business, which is otherwise supposed to take risks, and saying, please come and locate here and exports, and we'll let you make profits, without actually submitting you to any significant taxation, but rather giving you subsidies. Okay. So, but the point is, what we do know is that after years of the Make in India slogan, really there was no significant pickup in Indian exports on the manufacturing side. India was not becoming a manufacturing hub, which basically meant that whole expectation in that strategy was not really, coming to fruition, because whatever be the structural factors which was making India less of a attractive base for world market production for, let's say, domestic firms as well as transnational firms, that hadn't changed. Okay. Now, in addition to that, the coming of Trump means that there is going to be some degree of focus on the part of America as part of making America great again, MAGA, and so on and so forth, on protection. And America is an important market for India, okay, and including for some kinds of engineering exports, etc. So if you actually have a shift to protection there, may not be as much protection as China is experiencing, but some protection, despite the special relationship which India has been trying to build with the United States, that would worsen what was a tendency which actually was not coming to fruition. It would mean that you'll actually even lose a little bit of what you already had. So to look to the global market as being a source of demand, which can compensate for the absence of domestic consumption demand, or the deceleration of domestic consumption demand in absence of adequate public expenditure to stimulate private investment, that is not going to get resolved on the basis of global demand. That was the point I was trying to make.
And do you also like to comment on the recent thing that just before Modi's visit to US, they're reducing the traffic tariff? Would you like to comment on that?
Well, they're not reducing the tariff. They are basically, I mean, Trump has basically said that India is a country which actually benefits from us and we don't get any benefits. So what India is going to try and do is to try and neutralize that and say that, and also India benefits from some trade with Russia, because of the fact that it imports cheap oil from Russia and then processes it and exports it to world markets, etc. And United States wants sanctions against Russia. That might change under Trump. We don't know. But so there are a lot of things which need to be resolved. But at the moment, there is no concession which has been given. It's just that India is trying to stall any adverse response on the part of Trump. How successful they would be, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But the way they are treating, undocumented Indian workers, and bringing them on military planes, handcuffed and so on, doesn't seem to suggest that there's going to be any special treatment for India. And obviously, the Indian government wants to be soft on that, doesn't want to make too much of an issue on that, partly as a way of appeasing the US, such that they will not get hurt, at least on the trade front, is the way I see it.
Yes, economics is always so closely linked up with politics. Now, as because you have mentioned this thing, now the government of India, they didn't say, I think, anything. The way this people are brought from America, US to India, they were handcuffed, they were brought like slaves.
Mm. Well, today's newspaper seems to suggest that the External Affairs Ministry has made some kind of a statement, but they haven't actually formally launched a protest against the United States for doing this. They have said that, handling undocumented workers in this sense, that is, they moved from the External Affairs Minister's initial statement saying that this is due process to now saying that this is not a proper way of dealing with it. But that's about as
And they actually, it was quite strange. They didn't even utter a word, no complaint, nothing. And they were speaking in such soft terms. Even they admitted that, okay, there's nothing wrong. It was really, it put India in a very, very, bad light internationally also.
Yeah, because Latin
So,
America Latin American countries are protested. They're willing to,
yeah, they are protesting. They are protesting. Now, okay, there might be some people might be there, undocumented, laborers, maybe there, workers, maybe there. But how come you treat them like this?
yeah,
That's such inhuman treatment, like slave.
yeah. No,
It's
even children, they say that even children, they tied their legs with ropes and so on inside the plane.
and tying them with ropes, just think, children and women. That's actually unspeakable. That's really very sad. And on the one hand, this is happening, and on the other hand, they say that okay, Vishwa Guru and all kinds of things. This is strange. Okay, my next question is actually the next question is related to what you have said earlier, but maybe a little more elaborate. The principal problem seems to be income disparity, which was actually also admitted by the economic survey. For stable growth, a parity is needed between capital and labor, which is even admitted to the in the economic survey 2024-25. But in a business-friendly India, corporate profitability rose to 15-year peak. In your article, you mentioned it in 2023-24, with the biggest firm being disproportionately beneficiaries. If same thing, but a little elaboration, if you could just explain it a little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, so the point is what we do know is that a few business groups, have benefited hugely in recent times. They've seen a significant increase in profitability. They've seen their share prices go up. So there's this whole thing of who's the richest person in Asia or whatever, who's among the top richest people in the world and so on. So, so clearly what is happening is that there is one sort of very tiny edge in which there's been a significant and substantial increase in profitability and wealth, earnings and wealth.
For a small section, or a very select corporates.
Yeah. But the point is, on average, what we've had is earnings have begun to improve a little bit in the corporate sector after COVID, etc. While that is happening, what I've done is really take the evidence which is quoted by the economic survey itself and said that this hasn't actually reflected itself in terms of the wages of workers in the corporate sector. And we must realize wages in the workers of the corporate sector is actually the top end of wages in India. Even peasants don't get those kinds of earnings, and sometimes, and of course, agricultural laborers and workers in the informal sector, even in the urban areas, they don't get earnings of that kind. So even if those workers' wages are not going up, when profits are going up the way they are, and when there is a certain degree of buoyancy in profit earnings and managerial incomes in the corporate sector, you're basically saying that there is a significant increase in income inequality. Now, the point about increases in income inequality is what economists call the propensity to consume and spend is much less in the upper income groups. I mean, how many fancy cars and SUVs and durables and lavish weddings and so on can you have? So it basically, if you want consumption to increase, it has to be mass consumption, which means that there has to be a certain degree of increase in income in the lower, middle, and lower classes. And if that is not happening, obviously that underlies in part the fact that you don't have dynamism as far as consumption is concerned. And even to the extent that you have some degree of increase in consumption, which occurred, a significant part of it was fueled by credit, fueled by debt. And you're not able to sustain that because of the fact that defaults are rising. So there is a structural problem. If you have this kind of recovery where there's only increases in income in let's say the top 2% or 3% or 5% or whatever it may be, then you cannot have a growth in consumption demand of any significance. That is the point I was trying to make. That's the deeper structural problem.
Yeah. Now, another thing here, when you're talking about, say, labor wages. Now, this slogan of eight working hours. Now, I have seen that people, particularly the young people, who work in the unorganized sectors mostly, they say their salary, their payment wage is about 15,000, 20,000. In 15,000, 20,000 per month, it's very difficult to run a family in today's time of price rise. And what they do overtime. They work, instead of working, say, for 8 hours, they are working 16 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours. Now, how do you actually, if you could elaborate a little bit on this point?
No, so this is, you see, the point is, there's been a long-term tendency in India of the persistence and intensification of casualization of work. More and more people are either self-employed or casual workers, and you don't really have regular employment. You don't have formal employment in the sense that there's no contract, there's no signed contract, there is no paid leave, there is no social security of any kind, etc. That is one end. But the other end is, you're basically saying that, the number of people in precarious employment, where you can lose jobs quite easily, or lose your earning hours, that has resulted in this whole tendency towards casualization, taking whatever work you can get, and this growth of the gig economy. You become a delivery person.
If I can just intervene a little bit here, even in government sectors, even in government departments,
There's a
the
casualization. Yeah.
casualization has increased so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even in the formal factory sector, there's a whole number of workers. You basically go and stand in front of the factory gate and hope you'll get employment that day. Then it depends upon, they decide, that whether how many people they want to employ for that day. And so you don't have a regular job. I mean, there's some people who have a regular job, but a lot of people don't. That's been increasing over a period of time. And then, of course, you have people going into all this gig economy and so on. And whatever, Zomato and delivery and this and that.
Terrific,
So,
terrific.
so when you have that kind of thing of a large reserve of unemployed workers trying to get into whatever jobs that they are, obviously, earnings get suppressed, and therefore, to get if you have some notion of some target earnings, whatever, if you want, 10,000 in a month, the only way you can try and approach it is by increasing the number of hours you work, which of course has all sorts of implications. It has implications in terms of health, it has implications in terms of your mental state, it has implications in terms of the effect on family life, it has implications in terms of who's going to, take the burden of care, look after children, look after aged parents, and so on and so forth. All of those problems are there. Plus, you don't, for all that hard work, you still don't, your earnings are, constantly, not really
Difficult to
taking off.
meet the both ends.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the state.
That when we are speaking in terms of growth, expansion of economy, and all other things, beautiful terms, but then that is what is happening
Yeah,
at
that's
the
right. Absolutely.
in the at large in our
Yeah.
society, and you can
Yeah.
see it everywhere.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Now, coming to the next question, the projected capital expenditure in 2024-25 was 15 lakh crore, which was an increase of 20%. But the actual increase was only 5%, which implies a fall in real terms. This is despite the center's access, as you said, that their access to receipts, all the from Reserve Bank, RBI, from
Exceptional receipts, let's call them. Yeah.
receipts. Yes. So now. And so why is this happening? Why is this happening?
No, so what I was trying to point out to is that, I mean, otherwise things haven't changed. The government is trying to say that we're going to continue with the conservative fiscal position, with fiscal consolidation. We're going to reduce the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. We want to stabilize, government's debt relative to GDP and so on. So you don't want to borrow and spend beyond a point. You have given away these tax concessions to, income tax earners. You are not taxing those corporates which are becoming extremely profitable, even though you might not have given them additional concessions. You retain the concessions and you'll not tax them anymore. And on top of that, you are actually saying, listen, I mean, we recognize that there are these problems, one with consumption demand and one with capital expenditure. So what we're going to do is, one is we're going to give these tax concessions to boost consumption. That's what the finance minister and the ministry officials say. And the other is, we're going to increase capital expenditure by something like 17% in nominal terms in 2025-26 relative to 2024-25. So the question is, I mean, so how are they managing to do this? You're giving concessions to boost consumption ostensibly, or get votes, whatever it may be, to consolidate your vote bank among a very small section of. It's not, it's not a middle class in the sense that, the notion of the middle class is not that these are the middle income earners. That's not the notion of the middle class. Normally, a middle class, when we speak about it in global terms, you're saying that every economy has, besides the very rich, it has a segment of people who are not the very rich, but who have spending power. And you're trying to say that, okay, I'm so then if you look at it in terms of where they are in the income spectrum, they may not be the middle class, but conceptually, that's what we mean when we say, the middle class. You want to get to the middle class. Okay, it's not middle class in a purely
Yeah,
arithmetic.
yeah, that's important because everywhere when they're discussing middle class, middle class, middle class. Now, who are the middle class? So, for the Indian economy is concerned, who are the middle class?
Yeah.
Now, this 7 lakhs to 15 lakhs.
Yeah.
Actually, even now in today's inflation, now I do not know how we can call this a middle
Yeah,
class. This
yeah, yeah.
class.
But the point is, they are the section which is not consisting of wealth owners. I mean, asset owners of large magnitude who you think have the capacity to spend. The rest of them don't have the capacity to spend. Because they don't get incomes which of significance. So one is you want to give them tax concessions, and the other is you don't want to borrow and spend, and you don't want to tax the really rich, then how are you increasing capital expenditure? That's the question I'm posing. Because you're saying that we want to increase capital expenditure and we want to give these tax concessions because you want to boost consumption demand with tax concessions, and we want to, boost investment with increased capital expenditure, and therefore stimulate private investment as well. So the question is, how are they doing it? If
There
you're,
is a contradiction in it because you
yeah,
don't have revenue, don't have
yeah,
money. It's
yeah.
because you are not taxing the
So,
very rich.
so what I've suggested in that, and all the others have also suggested, basically they've been managed to do this in an accounting sense by hugely reining in and curtailing and cutting, welfare expenditures and expenditures on flagship programs on
Yeah,
NREGA.
we are coming to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Just
that's
next.
that's the way the puzzle is resolved. I mean,
Yes,
if at
yes,
all you can
yes.
resolve it.
It's all a puzzle, as you have rightly said that it's actually the number game.
Yeah,
It is all number game.
yeah.
It's
It's
very
it's a play. It's
nicely
a play with numbers. Exactly.
play with numbers because from the beginning to the end, it's a very your article. It's not a very elaborative big piece, but then I think it has catch. It has got the essence of the present actually financial the economic situation of the country so well. That is why I was so happy
Oh,
going
thank
through the
you.
piece, and
I'm
I
glad you
liked
liked
it. uh,
it.
I liked it so much. Now the next thing is that again, we are actually in a circular manner. Maybe we are discussing the same thing once and one again, but then it is necessary that, okay, we need to, maybe in a circular way, we are going to the essence of the thing. The budget seems to favor the corporate sector and the middle income group in its tax proposal, but will it augment the consumer demands when the masses of the people don't have income and purchasing power, which I have actually
Yeah,
explained little while ago, isn't
yeah,
it?
that's right.
Yeah, yeah,
That I basically, that is where the marginal propensity to spend. If you get
yeah,
more income, they'll go and spend that income.
yeah,
Now, what I'm trying to say is that there's a small set of people to whom you say that you've given these tax concessions because, what percentage are taxpayers? And in that, you're talking about, as you said, people in this range from 7 lakhs, you're taking it to 12.75 lakhs and telling them you don't have to pay. And then you're giving some others in the other tax bracket some benefit. Okay, let us say you're getting a benefit of some 80,000 rupees or 100,000 rupees over a year in that small segment, of which a part of it is going to be eroded by inflation. Then there would be a little, even if there's a little bit of increase in consumption there, unless you increase consumption in a large mass, which is not going to happen with that kind of a tax concession. So that's what the amount of stimulus which this budget gives to demand is actually limited, and even to the extent it does through capital expenditure, it's at the expense of welfare. That is, you're squeezing those whose consumption should actually increase for the mass market to grow and create growth, and underpin growth.
So then there is no possibility of actually
Yeah,
expansion of
absolutely.
economy and growth.
Yeah.
Now, my next question, I have only one question left after this. So the fiscal deficit will be controlled by sacrifice of revenues and self-imposed restraint on the borrowing. The budget promises to take hike capital expenditure by 17%. It is not difficult because the spending on social welfare scheme has not increased considerably with the passage of time. You have explained there that okay, this uh, national the food security bill, the act,
Yeah.
then the
Then,
rural
and
employment guarantee scheme.
correct.
Okay, there is little marginal increase in the allocation of fund, but it has not increased as it should have increased.
No, and also
With
after taking inflation into consideration, there's no increase.
no, there is no
Yeah,
increase.
inflation is going to be, let's say, 5%, 6% or something like that. So
Uh-huh. So now here I do not know whether I am reading it correctly or whether I am not able to get the point. The thing is that okay, on the one hand, they have curtailed all the welfare schemes which actually benefit the masses of the people. On the other hand, they want to increase the capital expenditure. When they increase the capital expenditure, that means laying of roads, then mega projects,
yeah,
and from this laying of roads, mega projects, okay, we don't have conceivable evidence with us, but everybody says this that okay, why they need such big projects? Because there is a question of commission. So if you get the commission from these big projects, then maybe you can convert it to the funds of the ruling party. I do not know if I am sounding a little, you say, gross here, but then that what do you say on this?
yeah. Listen. Corruption is there. I mean, the government will not deny it, but but it's, yeah. One is that, but I think it's also there are two things. One is, of course, if you these mega projects and all, the problem with them is that they don't really create employment of significance. You spend a lot of money, but for every unit of money you spend, the amount of employment you get is very little. It's because of the fact that they're not labor intensive; they're pretty capital intensive and
And
so.
they are also very temporary in nature.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is that I think the government itself is not really convinced that it's actually going to make so much of a difference in terms, which is why the whole emphasis is on all these public-private sector projects and, saying that we're going to change the regulatory regime. We are going to make things easy. The ease of doing business is going to be improved even more, etc., etc. So you're basically saying that, okay, we'll give some benefits to the private sector, which anyway is making a lot of profits, and hopefully they will do this job, which we can't do in full. We'll spend a little bit extra money, maybe. I don't even know whether that's true, but let's say they do. But that is not going to make the real impact. The real impact they're hoping is that private investors can be incentivized to come and do this, which of course there is no evidence that once they've done it with a lot of bank credit in infrastructural projects and they burnt their fingers. I don't know if the private sector is going to come back into these areas.
And bank
So
credit, yeah.
yeah. No, so I think that even the government, this is it's a kind of rhetoric. I don't think it believes so much fully that this is going to transform. But you want to say that I'm doing something, so I'm boosting consumption demand by giving this little tax payment. I'm going to have capital expenditure increase, but I'm also very prudent. I'm not going to have a large fiscal deficit. So it's a kind of rhetoric.
It's just a presentation only, just a presentation. And again, also with the statistics, with the facts and figures, who is going to follow them minutely?
Yeah.
Actually, this they have said at the time of presentation of the budget, and then maybe they can just
Absolutely. Your
forget about
revised
it.
figures and actual figures can vary quite
Very,
considerably.
very, and then nobody is there who is going to be made accountable for that. There's nothing. Now,
Yeah.
coming to the last question, and where actually you have said something very, very vital and important. and it comes to the foreign investment. You gave the example that in insurance sector earlier it was 75%. Now they have opened it to
100%.
100%. 100%. And while doing this, actually, are we compromising with our sovereignty? With our sovereignty, or we are actually, as it is now, these corporates, they are controlling everything. Now, even when we allow the foreign investment also 100%, and why will they invest here if they cannot make profit, isn't it? So this last point, if you could explain it a little bit.
You see, first of all, we must understand, um, allowing foreign investment or even allowing 100% foreign investment in an area like finance, which insurance is part of the finance sector, okay, is not going to get you any major export revenue, is not going to get you productive capacity, is not going to give you huge amounts of. So you're in some sense saying that, listen, I just want to attract some foreign money into the system. Okay. And to attract this foreign money, I must tell them that I'm open, I'm liberal, I'm going to give you freedom. You can have 100%, not just 74%, and so on and so forth. But if to the extent that already there is a certain amount of foreign finance coming, it's coming into the stock market, it's coming to bond market, it's coming to other financial sectors, it's coming to insurance also, besides banking, etc. And there is a fear always, which the government has, that listen, if we don't appease this capital, if we don't constantly say that we'll try and protect and boost your profits in the domestic economy, because these are non-tradable sectors, they're not going to export, they're producing for the domestic market. Okay, if you don't appease them, there is a danger that because it's footloose, it's finance, they can just get up and go. So if you can have a flight of capital. So the more you allow this kind of capital to come, the more you become dependent on shaping your domestic policy in keeping with the interests of foreign finance. So that's the loss of sovereignty. You lose domestic policy space, the ability to do things. So you would not want to give any benefits to the poorest sections and so on, because you'll say that, oh, they'll think that I'm being populist, I'm being profligate, whatever it may be. So you're actually ending up constraining. Now, why are you doing it? I think I think this is really partly a belief that in some sense, if we actually want to if we want to retain even the past foreign capital which has come in, we got to keep giving concessions to foreigners. So so you say 74, now I'll make it 100. No, you can't make it 110. There is no 110%. Okay.
Yeah.
Then you'll think of some other area. Maybe you'll think that, there's an LIC which is doing very well. There's a GIC which is doing very well. Why don't we privatize it? Why don't we allow them to sell their stocks to foreign investors? I mean, you'll have to keep going. The more you relax and the more you try to appease them, the more you'll have to give in the future. And if you have to give in the future, you have to find things to give them. You have to find things to be able to hand over. So this is actually an indication of a trend, not just of a loss of sovereignty as a result of this particular move, but it actually is reflective of the fact that this has been happening continuously, so that you've got 100% in insurance, and now you'll have to think of something else next year or the year after. So you are seeing actually opening up domestic space to foreigners in an area in which you can't say that the reason I'm doing it is because they'll help me earn foreign exchange by exporting, because these are non-tradables. So really, I don't understand this at all. And the thing is, we must realize India, by building liabilities of this kind, investments in stock market, investments in bond market, investment in the fire sector, finance, insurance, real estate, etc., by foreigners, has built this, has been building foreign exchange reserves. Now, those people, when they come and make profits, they don't come for small profits. They come for 15%, 20%. That's the kind of profitability they're looking at, or even more. And when they take that profit out of the country, which they're allowed to do, it goes out in dollars. When you take that liability and accumulate reserves, What do? You invest it in government, US Treasury bills, because it has to be safe, it has to be liquid, it has to be secure. And how much do you get on US Treasury securities? You get some 2%. So you are going to get 2% foreign exchange earning on this money, but that money is actually reflecting somebody else taking out 20% or 15% every year. So you're not only losing your sovereignty, your domestic policy space, you're not only making yourself prone to having to lose more in the future, but you're
You are
paying a
not
heavy,
making anything.
yeah, you're making paying a heavy cost in foreign exchange. So it's a combination of a bizarre, unthinking policy in which the only thing is you just want to appease foreign capital, and you want to appease maybe the United States government and say that, listen, look at what we're doing, we're helping out foreigners, and so on and so forth. So that's the point I was trying to make.
Now we shall end the discussion. But the thing is, before we end, the people who would be watching this conversation, they would come to the conclusion that, okay, these people, they are only discussing the problems. So India is such a vast country. We have such tremendous, you see, working force. We have, it is a varied country. We are different climatic conditions, different potentiality. So why are we in such a terrible state today economically? So don't we have any way out? What do you say?
Given the discussion we've been having, and given where my arguments are coming from, the basic point one is trying to make is that unless you grow the domestic market, you can't be dependent, and even more so in today's world and the world which is unfolding, in the post-Trump era or post-Trump 2 era, that you can't depend on global markets to carry you. You can't have delusional ideas that you can be a South Korea or even a China, which was before, till recently. So you basically have to say that you have to grow your domestic market, and you cannot grow your domestic market unless the mass of the people see an increase in their incomes. And to increase the incomes of the mass of the people, you can't just become a victim of pressure from international finance, and you have to attack domestic asset inequality. If we have asset inequality of the kind that we have, and we allow it to grow over a period of time, then you don't grow your mass market. And if you don't grow your mass market, you can't actually have a situation. So it is not that you have to grow first and then distribute to give people welfare with the more output that you get. You cannot grow till such time as you give people incomes. You actually need to make that a part of the growth path. And to do that, as I said, you need to attack, you need to keep foreign finance at bay, and you need to attack domestic asset inequality.
So the fundamental thing now is that, okay, there has to be a parity. There has to be a coordination between the ends and the means.
Absolutely.
If the end is the overall growth of the economy, that growth is impossible unless it reaches to the masses of the people.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
in whatever way we do it, we may not have a very, I say, ready-made formula for that. But unless we do that, unless we strengthen the domestic economy by spreading, by actually reaching out to the masses of the people, then there is no magic formula of actually strengthening the economy and raising the growth. Am I
Yeah.
correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That you need a combination of lower income plus wage-led growth in order to get growth. And that growth will also automatically give a certain amount of welfare for a majority of the people, as opposed to only for the top 1% of the population, which doesn't give you growth.
So thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your
Thank
time.
you.
And I look
Thank you.
forward. You must not say no when next time also I come to you for
Yes,
such a
sir.
discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.